This video shows how to use subflows in Prescient Designer. Subflow is the fundamental block for making very complex designs. This is because as you build up a large design, if you put other blocks in the same workspace, it becomes unmanageable. If you start to spread out the blocks over different tabs, after a little while, it'll become unmanageable also. So Subflows is the method that basically every engineering software uses to manage complexity, because you can build subflows on top of subflows, and you can build really large designs that way. Subflows make it easier for you to visualize your design because it simplifies how many elements you have in each workspace. It also allows you to reuse designs, to replicate designs. So really, it is very important to understand how to properly use subflows if you wanted to design large-scale projects. So for example, this particular project here is our demo machine vision application. This is a dashboard generated from that design. And you can see that it's pretty complicated. Multiple log tables, you can load files, you can do machine vision detection. For this type of design, the workspace actually looks quite simple, right? But a lot of the blocks here are actually subflows to do different tasks. For example, this dashboard header block, if I double click and go into it, basically sets up all the different headers for the dashboard. Or this particular database block, if I go inside, you're either you're reading from the database, or you are saving to the database, depending on what happens on the dashboard. And there's additional subflows here. For example, you can keep going down, and you can, basically, this is how you read from the database. So, by putting things into subflows, it makes your design a lot manageable. So here we're going to look at some things you can do with Subflow in Prescient Designer. So let's do something simple. We're going to add a inject block, and we're going to add a change block. So we're going to turn this change block into a subflow. The way that you turn this into a subflow is you select the nodes, and you go to menu and subflow, selection to subflow. So now you have a subflow here. If you double click on it, you can edit the subflow template. So let me go to the here and get rid of this. Okay, so now you can see that you automatically get a input pin. If it doesn't get added, you can add one here, and you can add multiple output pins. So Node-RED only allows one input pin, but multiple output pins. So now you have the input and output, and then you can go here, edit properties, and you can change the name of the subflow. For example, we're going to call it a test device, because we're going to actually turn this subflow into a device. And then you can, if you wanted to modify it, you can come over here. Notice that this category, that's where the subflow sits in the palette manager. So we're going to put it under the devices category here. And I can also change the color, because I like all my devices to have the same dark purple color. And maybe I'll change the icon as well. And maybe I'll use a Wi-Fi icon, and because that's a Wi-Fi icon. So now if I say done, notice that I have this test device subflow added here under the devices category. Now I'm going to change the change node. I'll just call it simple message, and I'll do I am. So I'm going to use the JSON data to do combination of a string and the environmental variable. So the environmental variable is going to be device ID, which is an environmental variable that tells you which device this is. Okay. So now that I'm done with this, and so I'm done with this subflow. So I'm gonna close this subflow, go back to the sandbox. I'm gonna add a debug node. What I'm gonna do is in the debug node, I'm gonna show the entire message object, not just message payload, but the entire message because I want to show something interesting. So with the, oh, here, complete message object. That's what I need. Okay, so I hit done. I connect it like this. And now I can add devices into this particular test device subflow here. So I'll first add one device, just pick one, maybe RevPy, and I say done. And now I hit deploy. This flow will be associated with RevPy, and it'll be deployed to RevPy. So I hit the deploy here, and you should see that it's going to be deployed to RevPy. Looks like it's done because it's a very small block here. But looks like I have other blocks that I'm deploying, which may take some amount of time. So let's wait for that to finish. Okay, so now this subflow is going to be running in the RevPy device. And if I go to the debug terminal, you can see messages about how each device gets successfully updated. So I can delete that to make it clean. And what I'll do is I'll hit the timestamp. And then here you can see that it prints out the message. So if I expand that, so the payload is I am RevPy. This is because inside the subflow, inside the change block, we wanted the message payload to be I am device ID. So that's the payload. What's interesting is that it also the debug node also prints the source. So by default, when every device delivers a message to the subsequent block, a message.source property is added. It tells the next block which device this message comes from. So that can be useful if you have multiple devices going to the same node here. So that is good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another device to show you what happens when we have two devices. Okay, so that's done here. I'll do another deploy. And now the IOTG RPi block will be updated. Okay, now that's done. So if I go out here to the debug panel, delete the existing messages, and hit the inject button here, you notice that now I have two messages coming in, right? Because I actually have two devices here. So if we look at both, the first one, I am IoTGRPi. So that's the IoTGRPi device. And you can see that, the source is indeed IoTGRPi. And the second one comes from the RevPi with the same source. So this means actually this subflow here, there's two of them. So technically what happens is the subflow itself, it's called a subflow. But every instance that you have inside the workspace is actually called a subflow instance, which is a instantiation of the subflow block. So for example, I can drop another subflow instance of the same subflow, right? So if I say unclick the IoT GR here, and I click the IoT GR here, and I route it like this, this is the same as before. So previously I had two devices associated with one Subflow instance. Now I have one device associated with each Subflow instance, and the result is actually the same. So now to prove that, if I do a deploy, and now if I delete the debug panel, hit timestamp, you can see that I still get two messages, one from RevPy, the other from IoTG RPy. So it's the equivalent as before. So if you have 1,000 devices associated with the Subflow here, you essentially have 1,000 Subflow instances, okay, here. That's something you got to remember. And another thing you wanted to pay attention is that, let's say if I go into the Subflow. So what does it mean when you go into the Subflow? Now you're actually editing the Subflow template itself. So for example, if I go here, and I change this from I am to maybe this is. So change it to that, right? So say done, and I go back to sandbox. So I notice that I changed this subflow here, right? What's going to happen after I do the deploy and hit the inject button? What you are going to see is, oops, looks like we have a disconnect, probably due to some kind of internet connection problem. Let's see if it gets reconnected. Okay, let's give it another try. Now, if I hit the inject button, notice that both message has become, this is RevPy, this is IoT GRPy. So both of those have changed, the RevPy and the IoT RPy. So what this means is that those are two separate Subflow instances, but they point to the same Subflow template. Okay, so if you just change the Subflow template, then all the Subflow instances are going to change. This is actually a good thing. This is because for each Subflow template, you can have multiple instances deployed in your design, and you just need to change the Subflow template to get all the Subflow instances to change. Then you may ask, okay, what happens if I want a Subflow? What happens if I just want to change one Subflow instance, but not the other? In that case, you actually have to create two different Subflow instances. What we wanted to do is to clone a subflow. Cloning a subflow is a bit of a hack, but it's not hard. So what you do is you highlight on the subflow instance you wanted to clone. You go to menu, export, and then copy to clipboard. This copies the subflow instance to the clipboard. And now you go back to the menu and do import. Then Control V to paste the subflow into the window. And just now you want to go back all the way up to the first item in the JSON object. And you notice that the name right now is test device. So you can change this test device to something else. Call it test device 2. And now that's going to clone this subflow. One thing that if you have other subflows inside a particular subflow template, you actually don't have to do this. Node-RED can automatically rename the subflow, and then you just change the name again later. But if you do not have subflows inside the subflow, this is how you do it. So if you just import, now you can see that test device number 2 appears here, and you can also see it's appearing in the palette manager. So I'm going to delete this subflow instance and just substitute it with this one here, and double check to see if the right device is selected. It should be. So let's take a look. Okay, so now, yep, IoTGRPy is cloned back in. So that is fine. And we're gonna do a deploy. Okay. So now if I click on the timestamp, I'm actually going to see exactly the same output because the cloned subflow template is the same as the original subflow template. But now I can go into this subflow template and change anything inside. The subflow template here does not change because there are two different subflow templates now. Now let's go back to the case where we have so this is how you clone and how you make different sets of subflows. Now let's go back to the case where we actually have the same subflow, use the two subflow instances use the same subflow template. I'm going to show you something else. So I'm going to go back to this scenario here, and let's do a deploy. So what I'm going to show you is that you can use environmental variables to put some differentiation into the same subflow template that you use. So for example, if I go into the subflow template and edit properties, I can go, I think over, just over here. You can see that you can add additional environmental variables. So let's say I add an environmental variable A and set that as a number. By default, maybe it's a 1. You actually do not need to set a default if you don't want to. So I'll add another environmental variable B, and I'll set this one also to a number 2. Okay, so now I've added 2 environmental variables to this subflow template here. And now I'm going to go back to the subflow, the sandbox. And now we can see that the A and B appears, right? So for example, for the revpi subflow instance, I'm going to change it to 10 and 20. Okay, and keep the environmental variables to their default values for the IoTGRPy. Okay. So I'm also going to go back into the subflow template and change this. So this, we have, this is, device ID. I'm going to change it to the answer is, let's do, so now environmental variable A, plus environmental variable b. Okay. Capitalization matters. Make sure you don't make the mistake for the capitalization. And also, it's better to put parentheses around because, with all this concatenation, it's hard to tell what's the priority. So always put parentheses to prioritize the different actions. So now what we would expect is to get a sum of of those two environmental variables. Okay. So now we go back to sandbox, do a deploy. Let's see if we've done this correctly. Okay, it complains that device revpi could not be updated. Let me just do another deploy just in case if it didn't get through the network. Okay, I think that have worked. So I'm going to delete all the messages in the debug panel and hit the timestamp. Now let's check it out. So in the case of IOTGRPi, it's 1 plus 2. And in the case of RevPi, it's 10 plus 20. So effectively, we created a summation subflow here. And you can, add your own parameters to the environmental variables. Okay, that's actually a very useful feature as you go deep into designing your subflows. The last feature I want to show you is basically how you filter your communication into the edge subflow. So let us go back to the single subflow instance case, but I'm going to add the IOTGRPi back. Okay, so basically I wanted to have both devices, just combined for convenience. And very often there are cases where, when you're communicating by default, you're communicating to all the devices associated with Subflow. But sometimes you wanted to just to communicate to one of the devices or a few selected devices of the whole group. The way to do that is we have a parameter that you can set to specify which devices you wanted to communicate to. So we can demonstrate this, use the change node again. So let's drag that down and put it in here. And so here, instead of message.payload, there's a special parameter called message.destination. And for this, you can set it to be a JSON object, essentially a a list, and you can put a one or more. Let's call it. Let's say RedPi, right? So we can put RedPi here. You can add, other more devices if you like, right? Device, the IoT, GRPi, etc. But in this case, let's just put RedPi here. And so let's click to done. This means that we've set the message dot, destination field here. So now if we deploy, and what's supposed to happen is that now only the message coming in from the source should only go to the RevPi, and it does not go to IOTG RPi. So let's see if that's true or not. So it looks like, yes, we only have a message from the Raspberry Pi. This is actually super useful because, for example, if you have a set of devices you're monitoring and only one of the devices is sending an alarm, and you wanted to send a message back to that device to say everything is okay, reset, or control something, in that case, you can link wire to other devices, but control the message sending to only that particular device. Okay, I think I'm gonna show one more feature because this one is actually, pretty important when it comes to subflows. That is multiple inputs. So Node-RED only allows you to have one input into a subflow, but very often you need to have multiple actions going into a subflow to do different things. So how do you handle that? The way you handle that is you basically kind of have to basically handle that yourself. So let me give you an example. So let's say that this subflow has to do two things. One of them is it needs to tell me, who the subflow is. And the other one is that it gives me a sum of two numbers, right? So those two cases we covered before. So you would have two inputs. Each one tells the subflow to do a particular task. So in that case, we have to send some ID to the subflow. And we can use a message dot something variable to do that. You could do it with message dot payload if the message dot payload is not real data. But if the message dot payload is real data, you want to set another variable. Message dot topic is fine. You could also use something else. So in this case, let's just use message dot topic. So for the first one, I'll set it to be, say, who am I? So that's the one that prints out the device ID. Obviously, this is the identifier, so you could define it anything you want. I just picked this, because kind of makes sense. So, this block here allows you to directly add a message that topic in there. In other cases, you may have to add a change node to define the message that topic to be a particular identifier. So now I'm going to add another inject node. In this case, I'm going to set the message dot topic to be sum. So this is a sum nature. So let's say they go in here. And then this is the filter for the subflow. And inside the subflow, this is what I need to do. I need to add a switch node. A switch node is basically like a if then else or a case node. So the switch node, essentially what we'll do here is we will work on the message dot topic. I think that's what we used. So you can check if the message dot topic equals to something. I typically like the contains more than the equal, because the equal, you have to be exact, right? Contains simply means that, as long as it contains this particular, say, string, then that is okay. So even I can say if it contains who, that's fine. So I'll add another one, contains sum. That's the second one. So done. And now I need to move the input to the switch. And then this one over here. This is a sum one, right? Environment A plus B. So I will do the who am I one over here. And I'll change it to environmental variable to the device ID. Okay. So that should do it. And output number one. Oops, I need to add another output this way. Output number two. and done. So, oh no, I think we're not done. So we have to go back here. Now we have two outputs. We can just put them both into um, the um, the debug node. That's fine for this purpose. So now we deploy. Okay, so let's give this a try. So if I click on this one, it should give me print the name of the device. And if I click on this one, it should give me the sum. Let's see if that's true. So here, this gives me the answer is red pi. If I click on that one, the answer is 3. So who am I? And sum. So it's behaving correctly. So this is very useful if you have multiple inputs. And one last thing I wanted to mention is basically one thing you cannot do is you cannot do operations that work on both branches at the same time. For example, you cannot expect to add those two together. The reason for that is Node-RED is a asynchronous system. So there can only be one input coming in at once. It'll never happen that two inputs come in at the same time. So every time there's only one input, and it'll either go this way or the other way and gets processed. And you can never combine the results of the two branch. In order to do that, you would have to save one branch into a persistent variable, and then you can work on both. Persistent variable is a separate topic. You can find it in the Node-RED documentation, and we'll probably cover that future video. So this is it for the Subflow tutorial video. And Subflow is very, very useful. Once you get used to it, it is the best way for you to scale your design to things that to fairly complex designs. So if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with us, and we're happy to help. Thank you.